Alright, I'm sure we can all make a massive laundry list of all the dumb things that Sega has done. In fact, there may be too many to fit on a list. However, if Sega ever did anything that was actually smart, it would have to be the Genesis launch sequel ports. You see, the thing that made Sega so famous was their phenomenal arcade games. Arcade games they had already used to sell the Sega Master System, as well as the fact they had already been ported to every other system under the sun. So when the Sega Genesis came out, what were they gonna do? Hey, buy all those great arcade games you bought the Sega Master System for again! Yeah, no, that just plain wouldn't work. So what'd they do? Well, instead, they made nearly identical games in gameplay, but with new enemies, stages, and music, and passed them off as sequels. And perhaps one of the best examples of that would have to be Space Harrier 2. I mean, it's just Space Harrier. Again! But this time with new enemies and stages and music. For all intents and purposes, yeah, it's a sequel. It's providing new challenges, new experiences, many more battle stages, you could say. And I have to admit, it worked. I mean, look, I love Space Harrier, but even I would have to be hesitant about purchasing a whole new console just to play a slightly better version of Space Harrier, because technically it still wouldn't be arcade perfect, now would it? But in making Space Harrier 2, I get to go, hey, more Space Harrier, new Space Harrier. I gotta have that Sega Genesis so I can play some Space Harrier. Okay, technically, I bought it for Golden Axe 2, but Space Harrier 2 was the second reason I wanted a Genesis. So yes, it worked perfectly on me. But is there anything that makes Space Harrier 2 actually different? Well, the light homing shot type thing they tried to have in Space Harrier 1 is removed. All shots just go straight ahead. And you can pick your starting stage, and the bonus stages are lamer because you just shoot while you're on a hoverboard rather than riding on Uriel the Windworm. So that's about it. The only other thing I could think of is that it does seem to try to make use of the Sega Genesis's legendary quote-unquote blast processing, as the game does seem to go faster in a few stages. In fact, that seems to be the entire purpose of the hoverboard stages, is to just go super fast. Beyond that, yeah, it's just Space Harrier, but I can't stress how brilliant this was. Because honestly, if there's one thing the Sega Genesis is bad at, it's colors. It can only produce 64 colors on screen at once. And rest assured, you need a whole lot more than 64 colors to handle the original Space Harrier. In making it a sequel, though, I don't get to criticize the fact that it's less colorful than the original, that the enemies aren't quite as crazy, that it isn't quite as bright and happy. Yeah, Space Harrier 2 is a little more melancholy, but that's okay, because it's Space Harrier 2 instead of 1. Hey, you know what? For a Genesis launch title, well, I always say that rail shooters are great tech demos, and this is a grand example. The way the ground scrolls and moves comes really, really close to the actual original Space Harrier arcade game. The sprite scaling, which I don't think is actually scaling, they just have multiple sizes of every sprite, works pretty darn well. It all comes together. I mean, yes, it's not as smooth, it's significantly choppier and less impressive than the real Space Harrier arcade game, but fuck, we need a 32X to actually pull that off. As it stands, though, Space Harrier 2 was alright. I mean, it's more Space Harrier. The only thing is, well, I'm a little disappointed this game doesn't see more love. I mean, there's a certain set of classic Sega Genesis games that they keep re-releasing over and over again. All the Streets of Rages, all the Golden Axes, all the Sonics they can cram onto a disc. And you got a Sonic's Ultimate Genesis Collection and All-Star Collections, and even those little bootleg Sega Genesises, Sega Genesi, whatever the plural of a Sega Genesis is. But inexplicably, none of these things have Space Harrier 2 in it, even though it's really awesome. Oh, sure, they'll put Super Thunderblade and Golden Axe 2 on there, but not Space Harrier 2. What's up with that? It's a great game. It's like Space Harrier, but again. And when M2 did their quote-unquote Space Harrier 2 collection on PS2, they didn't bother to try to enhance the game. I would love to see a System 16 style Space Harrier 2 that actually, like, moves smoother. You wouldn't even have to redo the graphics. I'd just like to see it smoothed out a little bit. Oh, well, at least it got a re-release on the Wii Virtual Console, which is actually the version you're seeing right now. As it stands, though, Space Harrier 2 is, well, it's more Space Harrier. Yeah, it's not as colorful, it doesn't have the awesome theme song of the original Space Harrier, which is quite possibly the greatest song ever composed. But hey, I can't argue with more Space Harrier, can you?